Hello and welcome to the RealTime Fantasy Sports Show. I'm Jeff Paur, senior writer with RealTime Fantasy Sports, and it is time for my starts, sits, and sleepers for week 4 of the fantasy football season. I'm going to give you 3 starts, 3 sits, and a sleeper at the QB, running back, and receiver positions. And at the tight end spot, I'll give you 2 starts, 2 sits, and a sleeper there. I do this every week. I keep track of what I've done the week before as well to keep myself honest. And it's been a pattern. First week of the season, I went 14-12. Last week, 14-12. Week 2, 14-12, and last week, 14-12. So I've been really consistent, a little over 500. Hopefully, I can do a little better this week for you. I think things are starting to take shape a little more, and it's a little easier to figure out some things, some of the trends I like going forward. So hopefully, we do a little better than that 14-12 mark this week. And you have a lot of success in your games as well. So let's get it going. Let's look at the QB position first. I'll give you the starts there to start off the show. As always, I go with the QBs first, as I mentioned, and I'm going to go with Jordan Love of the Packers. Multiple touchdowns, 2 of 3 games. He did struggle some last week, but that was against the Browns. They are an unbelievable defense. I think Love's going to have a huge game this week against the Cowboys. They're a mess against the pass. They allow the most fantasy points to quarterbacks. Cowboys have allowed 30-plus points 2 straight games. I like the way Love has played this year. They've been throwing the ball really well, so I think he'll have a big game in this matchup. My next start at QB is Chiefs quarterback Patrick Mahomes. I know the offense hasn't been what we've been expecting yet this year. It's off to a slow start, but even with that said, Mahomes has 24-plus fantasy points 2 of 3 games. He's still getting it done. I think he's going to be involved in a high-scoring game this week against the Ravens. They allow the 5th most fantasy points to quarterbacks. If the Chiefs are going to score, I think they're going to have to throw the ball in this matchup. They haven't been able to run at all, and I think Mahomes is going to get a lot of chances to air it out and try to keep up with that high-powered Ravens offense. My last start at quarterback is Drake May of the New England Patriots. He surprisingly is 5th overall in fantasy quarterback scoring. He has at least 19.7 points every game, 2 straight games with multiple touchdowns. He gets the Panthers this week. I know their pass defense is ranked very high right now, but I think it's skewed a little bit because they've had some favorable matchups. I think May's going to be just fine in this game. I'd use him as a low-end QB1. I think he's going to have another game with 20-plus fantasy points. All right, let's look at my sits for week 4 of the fantasy football season at the quarterback position, and it starts with Aaron Rodgers of the Pittsburgh Steelers. He had a big week 1, got everybody excited, but he's done little his last 2 games. He has fewer than 15 fantasy points each of his last 2 games. And he gets the Vikings this week. They have yet to allow 200 passing yards in a game this year, and they allow the 3rd fewest fantasy points to quarterbacks. I'm just staying away from Rodgers in this matchup. I think they're going to lean heavily on Jaylen Warren once again, which is what they did last week. My next sit at QB is Trevor Lawrence of the Jacksonville Jaguars. Still the same old Lawrence to me. He has fewer than 14 fantasy points 2 of 3 games. I thought this year might be a little different for him, but he's still showing a lot of inconsistencies, and I just don't trust him unless it's a great matchup. And I don't think it's a good matchup this week against San Francisco. They allow the 5th fewest fantasy points to quarterbacks. They still haven't allowed more than 190 passing yards in a single game. So I think Trevor Lawrence is going to struggle in this one. My next sit at QB is Matthew Stafford of the Rams. The team's playing well. Stafford's been fine, but he hasn't done a whole lot for fantasy owners, quite frankly. He had fewer than 200 passing yards last week. He has less than 17 fantasy points 2 of 3 games. He gets the Colts. They've allowed less than 210 passing yards every game this season. I think Stafford's going to have another ho-hum showing in this one. My sleeper at QB, and I'm going to go with Geno Smith of the Las Vegas Raiders. He has 22-plus fantasy points 2 of 3 games. A move to Las Vegas has been a good one for Smith. He's getting a chance to air it out. And his only bad showing came in week 2 against a very good Chargers defense. He's been good besides that. I look from the top 20-plus fantasy points once again this week against the Bears. This is a team that allows the 3rd most fantasy points to quarterbacks. They've allowed at least 275 passing yards 2 straight games. I think Smith's a good streaming play in this option. Let's look at the running back position now. I'll start with the starts for the running backs, and I'll go with J.K. Dobbins as my first start. A move to Denver has been a good one for him. He's found the end zone each of his first 3 games to start the season. He had his best rushing showing last week, ran 11 times for 83 yards. I think he's going to do more of the same this week against Cincinnati. They allow the second most fantasy points to running backs. Bengals have allowed 135 plus rushing yards each of their last 2 games. I think Dobbins finds the end zone for a 4th straight game in week 4. My next start is Omarion Hampton of the Los Angeles Chargers. You hate to see a player get hurt, but the injury to Najee Harris is really going to open the door for Hampton to be the clear lead back for the Chargers going forward. He took advantage of that last week once Harris went down. He had a phenomenal game, showed his potential in that matchup. He had 129 total yards and a touchdown on 25 touches. I think he's going to continue to really rack up the touches. He's just going to gain confidence in a very good Chargers offense. And he gets the Giants this week. They allow the 4th most fantasy points to running backs. I think Hampton's a top 10 option for week 4. My last start at running back is Chuba Hubbard of the Panthers. He's 11th overall in fantasy running back scoring. He gets overlooked at times, but he's about as safe as it gets, in my opinion, for a fantasy running back. He has 17 plus fantasy points, 2 or 3 games. He gets a ton of volume. He plays the Patriots this week. They allow the 11th most fantasy points to running backs. I think it's going to be more of the same. He's going to finish around that top 10 mark for fantasy running backs and be a good play for all his owners. Let's look at the sits now at running back. And my first sit is a guy who is taking over the backfield in New York, and it's Cam Skattebo. I like him going forward. Even before the Tracy injury, it looked like Skattebo was going to be the clear lead back for the Giants in the coming weeks, but Tracy's hurt, so that means he's going to get even more work. He had 121 total yards last week, but even with that said, I think he carries some risk in this up and down Giants offense. He's not going to be a hugely consistent factor, in my opinion. I think he could have some poor showings, and one of those could be this week against the Chargers. They allow the 5th fewest fantasy points of running back. It's a really good defense, and they've played well the last couple weeks. I think Skattebo is just going to be okay for fantasy owners this week. My next sit is Ja'Cory Krosky-Merritt of the Washington Commanders. I don't know what's going on in that backfield. Krosky-Merritt did lead the team in snaps last week, but he got most of that work in garbage time. I just don't trust him in that backfield right now. I don't know who's going to be the lead back. I think it's going to be a 3-headed monster most weeks. That's going to make it tough to start any of those guys, especially this week against Atlanta. They have not allowed more than 110 rushing yards in any game. I'm just staying clear of Krosky-Merritt and really all the Washington Commanders running backs. So I'll stick with that theme with my last sit, and it's all the Patriots running backs. Ramondre Stevenson, Antonio Gibson, they fumbled last week. Stevenson fumbled twice, once along the goal line, so he got benched. Travion Henderson came in, but he didn't do a whole lot. So I'm just avoiding all of them right now. I need somebody to step forward and give me some faith in that backfield going forward. Right now, I don't want any part of any of those guys. They're just not doing much, or they're fumbling or losing playing time, you name it. I'm just avoiding the Patriots running backs right now. My sleeper at running back for this week is Woody Marks of the Houston Texans. He played a season high 48% of the snaps last week. Really good sign. Nick Chubb continues to do not a whole lot on the ground. I think Marks is a guy that's going to start getting more and more work, and it could happen this week against the Titans. They have really struggled to stop the run this year. They allow the 3rd most fantasy points to running back. So if Marks gets some work, I think he could do some damage here. Could be a sneaky flex play for fantasy teams. Let's look at the receivers now for this week. We'll do 3 starts, 3 sits, and a sleeper at receiver. We start with the starts, and it's Ricky Pearsall of the San Francisco 49ers. He has 100-yard games, 2 of 3. He had a season-high 11 targets last week. He's a clear top target in this offense. I don't know who's going to play QB this week yet for San Francisco. If it's Mac Jones, Brock Purdy, whoever it is, I still think Pearsall does well, especially against Jacksonville. They allow the 6th most fantasy points to receivers, and they've really struggled to stop the pass at times this year. So I think Pearsall's a must start no matter who's starting a quarterback for San Francisco this week. My next start is Jacoby Myers of the Las Vegas Raiders. Trey Tucker's the guy that had the huge game last week, but Myers remains the number 1 receiver in this offense for the Raiders. He has played at least 93% of the snaps all 3 games. He has 60-plus yards all 3 games, really consistent. He has double-digit targets 2 of 3 games, and 2 games with 12-plus fantasy points. I think he keeps it going this week. I already mentioned I like Geno Smith, so I think Smith's going to form a nice rapport with Myers this week against the Bears, who allow the 4th most fantasy points to receivers. My last start is Quentin Johnston of the Los Angeles Chargers. Kind of surprising for me to say this, but Johnston is 7th overall in fantasy receiver scoring. I really think he's a must start right now. You look at the pecking order there in Los Angeles for the Chargers, it goes Johnston, Keenan Allen, and then Ladd McConkey, in my opinion. That's how it's kind of shaken out so far. Not what we expected, but the numbers don't lie. Johnston's racking up the work, targeted 10 times last week, 14 plus fantasy points, all 3 of his games this year. He gets the Giants. They allow the 2nd most fantasy points to receivers. I think it'll be another good play this week, and you can't sit him at this point of the year. My sits at receiver. My first one is Marvin Harrison. He just continues to disappoint. He showed signs of life in week 1, but he's done nothing in the last 2 games. He has fewer than 8 fantasy points, 2 straight. He had an awful drop in that game last week. Could have been a really big play. He gets Seattle this week. They allow the 2nd fewest fantasy points to receivers. If you have better options, I really would consider using them over Harrison right now. He's just not getting it done, and I have little faith in him at this point of the year. My next sit at receiver, Stephon Diggs of the Patriots. He's really not yet emerged as the number 1 receiver for the Patriots. In fact, he has the 3rd most snaps on the team at receiver. We thought Diggs would be the clear number 1 option here, but that hasn't been the case. He has more than 50 yards receiving just 1 of 3 games, been up and down. They like to spread the ball around. They play Carolina this week. They have not allowed more than 215 passing yards in a single game this year. I know I said I like Drake May this week, but they spread the ball around to a host of options. Hunter Henry gets a lot of looks. I just don't think Stephon Diggs is a guy I trust right now at this point of the year. My last sit is Terry McLaurin of the Commanders. He is battling a groin injury, so he is a little bit up in the air to play to begin with. But even if he plays, I don't have a lot of faith in him. He had just 3 catches on 4 targets last week. He has fewer than 50 yards, 2 of 3 games. Falcons allow the 4th fewest fantasy points to receivers on the season. They have not allowed more than 160 passing yards yet this year. So McLaurin's got the injury, might not be 100% if he plays. I'm just avoiding him at all costs right now. My sleeper at receiver is Romeo Doubs of the Packers. He continues to lead the Packers receivers in playing time. He played a season-high 89% of the snaps last week. I know his fantasy numbers aren't piling up, but he's on the field a lot. The matchups are getting better for the Packers, especially this week against Dallas. They're a mess against the passes, I already mentioned. They allow the most fantasy points to receivers. I think Doubs is going to be a good play here as a number 3 receiver. I think he has his best game of the year in week 4. All right, let's look at the tight end position for this week, and we'll go with the starts. I'll give you 2 of those. My first one's TJ Hawkinson. Finally got going last week. First touchdown of the season. He had 5 catches for 49 yards on 6 targets. I think he keeps it going this week against the Steelers. They allow the 2nd most fantasy points to tight ends. They got torched by Hunter Henry last week. I think Hawkinson's going to be a good play here. He's a legit tight end, top 10 tight end for week 4. My next start is David Njoku of the Browns. He had a season high last week of 5 catches for 40 yards on 7 targets. I know those numbers aren't great, but he's been targeted at least 5 times every game this year. Harold Fanning gets a lot of the love right now at tight end for Cleveland. Njoku's still in the mix, though, and he's going to get a lot of work. They play the Lions this week. I think they're going to be playing from behind. That Detroit team looks awesome right now. They're going to need to score, probably air it out, and that bodes well for Njoku to get some targets in this matchup against a team, the Lions. They allow the 5th most fantasy points to tight ends. All right, I'll give you 2 sits at tight end. I gave you the starts are Hawkinson and Njoku. My sits, my first one's Zach Ertz at tight end. Another solid season for Ertz, 7th overall in tight end scoring right now, but he does have fewer than 40 yards 2 of 3 games. He hasn't been outstanding, and he gets a Falcons team this week. They've completely shut down the tight end. They have allowed just 3.6 fantasy points to the tight end all season. So that's in 3 games, 3.6 fantasy points. It's tough to use Ertz in this matchup, in my opinion, especially a guy that has struggled to post big yardage totals this year. I just don't think he's going to do much here. My last sit at tight end is Juwan Johnson of the Saints. He's really having a breakout season for his standards, 2nd overall in fantasy tight end scoring, but I still don't think he's matchup proof at this point. He's going to have some ups and downs, especially in the Saints offense. It just isn't very good. They play the Bills this week. This defense got it going last week. They allow the 2nd fewest fantasy points to tight ends on the season. So I think Johnson's a bit of a scary play here. I would look at other options for week 4. All right, my sleeper at tight end, we'll end with that. And it's Rhonda Gadsden of the Los Angeles Chargers. I got a lot of Chargers on this list, but I love this matchup against the Giants. And Gadsden played his first game of the season last week. He got some hype in the preseason. The rookie didn't play the first 2 weeks, but he played last week, and he played 26% of the snaps at tight end and had 5 catches for 46 yards on 7 targets. That's a lot of volume for a short amount of time on the field. I think this really bodes well for him going forward. He's going to emerge as that top tight end in that Chargers offense. He gets the Giants. They allow the 11th most fantasy points at tight ends. Gadsden is a guy I'm intrigued by going forward. All right, those are my starts, sits, and sleepers for week 4 of the fantasy football season. I hope you have a lot of success this week. Get a lot of W's in week 4. This has been Jeff Paur for RealTime Fantasy Sports. Have a great day.